Hello, welcome to another edition of the Pace Report, reporting live here at the Blue Note here in New York City. Pianist, composer, and educator Michel Camilo tonight is performing selections off his highly anticipated recording, the first that he's recorded in 4 years. And during the 4 years that he's been off, he hasn't really been away. He's really been playing to music festivals and clubs all over the world. But this album is very unique because he's coming full circle and he's brought together a brand new trio which features a bassist as well as a percussionist. Tonight we're going to sit down and talk about his new CD. We're going to talk about his origins in the Dominican Republic as well as how he was exposed to bringing all the music from Latin America as well as America and infused it into his piano style. Congratulations on this brand new CD. This is the first CD you recorded in 4 years. What took so long?
Well, you know, I take my time between CDs. I have 21 albums, you know, out under my name. But the thing is, you know, instead of quantity, I love quality. And I take my time to develop a new concept and something that refreshes my sound, that challenges me, and it keeps expanding my horizons. That's why I take my time. There's no rush. And in between, there was one album, but it's not just available in the U.S., only available in Europe and Japan, Asia, actually. It's called Caribe, but it's my big band, my New York big band. You can see 2 snippets on YouTube of that particular, because it's DVD and CD. But Sony, the label that handled it, only decided to release it in Europe and Asia for some reason so far. I'm trying to get it released in the US as well. So in the meantime, it looked like there was no album, but there was an album. It's an incredible all-star big band. You know, Joan Faddis, everybody's in there. You know, all the cats, Gary Smulyan, Dave Bargeron, you know, all the best guys in New York. Michael Mossman, Anthony Jackson. You know, and it's really a wonderful concert taped live in front of 6,000 people. But you know, in reality, it worked out differently because in the meantime, it served for me to work out my new record deal with Universal Music. And this album is my first album. Mano a Mano is my first album now from the U.S. To the world. And it's a new trio where I replaced the drum set for Latin percussion with the master, Giovanni Hidalgo. And the bass player is my bass player that has been with my trio for the last 9 years, Charles Flores. And the album is kind of like a Caribbean summit because Giovanni's Puerto Rican, Charles is Cuban, and I'm Dominican.
I was going to ask you about that. I mean, this is really going back to the whole beginning of jazz where, you know, I would even say back to the like 1945 with Dizzy Gillespie with the whole Latin, Cuban, Caribbean type rhythms. Is that what you were going with this?
It links to that, yes. It does, because at that time with Chano Pozo and Dizzy, there was a sound that Dizzy really discovered by blending the congas with jazz, and then later on Reveredo with Charlie Parker. You know, all those collaborations, they really were very successful. Even Brubeck did an album with just bongos and bass and piano. So there's a sound there that has not really been revisited in so many years, without the drums set, I mean. But still it's jazz, and it relates to the history of jazz. So what we do is we blend all the tradition together with our new ideas from our times. And yes, we do revisit some of the beats from that time. For example, our take on the Sidewinder relates to the Boogaloo of the 60s. And the first chord, the one that opens the album, yes, is based on Donna Lee or Indiana, you know, those chord changes. But, you know, with a totally new twist to it. And so on and so on, you know, like we covered Naima from John Coltrane, but we did under it, the underpinning, the rhythmic underpinning of it is based on the Abacoa tradition, the Santeria tradition of the Caribbean, you know, the Afro-Caribbean religion, which relates to the gods from Africa that were brought into the Caribbean. And, you know, that beat that you hear is really coming from the old bata drums applied to the 6 congas that Giovanni plays. In this case, tonight he's playing 5 congas here, plus bongos, timbales, all of it at the same time.
In the Dominican Republic, and you started off playing and studying classical music. How did you segue into jazz?
Well, I was very lucky to be born in a family of musicians. You know, my family is 2 generations of musicians and composers, all types, not just classical, but also popular. Like my uncles are famous for writing boleros and merengues and, you know, pop music down there. And then I had an aunt that was a classical piano teacher. And my dear uncle, one of my dearest uncles, was an incredible piano player, but he couldn't read a note for music. He just played by ear, but he had an incredible command of the instrument. So I just learned from them just by watching them playing. At my grandma, you know, she had a wonderful piano. And for me, music is really life, family life, you know, because I played since I was 4. I just learned by looking at everybody. Everybody played an instrument. Some of my uncles also played the guitar. Some of them sang. The other one played percussion. You know, so to be born in a family like that, you just have to play something because that's the way the family interacted. And then, you know, the classical music came in later because I played at 4. What I played was the instrument that my parents gave me at that time was an accordion that had keys on the right side and buttons on the left. But I was in love with the piano, but we didn't have a piano at home. So at 9, I asked my parents to send me to the National Conservatory to learn the piano. And they struck a deal with me. They said, if you're good and if you pass your courses well, then we'll buy you a piano. So I always tell a story because it's really funny. I drew the keys of the piano in the cardboard. And since I already had my ear pretty much developed by playing by ear and being able to pick any melody and just transcribe it and play it right away, I could hear the pitches by practicing on this piece of cardboard, you see? And then I passed my courses very well, and then my parents, sure enough, bought me a piano. And I had a piano at home, and then I started playing all the classical music. Then when I turned 14, I call it a turning point, because one of my cousins was a big jazz fan, and he had his own record collection. It's very hard to find jazz records down there, you know? So he was a very, very big fan of jazz, and so much that he started a jazz show on radio, jazz radio show, every Monday for 2 hours, and he used to play his records there. And sure enough, I turned on the radio one day in between practicing, and there was Art Tatum, and it was like the light came out, and he was playing T42 solo piano, and I fell in love with it. I just knew I had to play jazz. And then I went and ran to my cousin and asked him to start lending me records so I could learn this new genre for me that I just discovered. And he was lending me records, and this is that, this is Charlie Parker, this is Thelonious Monk, this is Ellington, and and I started getting my hands on books about jazz, encyclopedias, and learning the history and the styles of jazz, and how it all flowed, and how this was different from that, Chicago jazz, West Coast, East Coast, New Orleans. And at the beginning, I started, learning stride piano as well. James P. Johnson, Willie the Lion Smith. And that rubs now into my Latin stride, because what I did is instead of playing straight, I started syncopating the left hand, linked to my Caribbean roots and my Latin roots. And all of a sudden I came up with this other type of stride piano.
You've also straddled. You've recorded classical recordings, and you've also, straight ahead jazz, and also music of your heritage. What is it about classical music that helped you to enhance your jazz piano style now?
The classical has really helped me in many different levels, but the first thing that comes to mind, of course, is the absolute command of the instrument. By playing so much of the piano tradition from 500 years of piano music, then you get an incredible command of your instrument. You can really play what you're hearing inside yourself. So it gives me incredible liberties. I can take any liberties. Sometimes, some of the jazz purists, they don't dig it so much because I go in quasi-classical textures that then I bring them into the jazz heritage, but still, it's all good. It's music, So if you can just somehow put them together, and if it reaches your audience and it touches their hearts and souls, why not? Because at the end of the day, you're dealing with emotion and feelings, translating them into music. So that's the first side. The second side that it really helped me with is the compositional aspect. Because, you know, I wrote my first song when I was 5. I came up with an original melody, and my parents noticed it. So they hired a professional musician that used to come and transcribe everything I came up with. So by the time I turned 9, I had like 30 or 40 compositions, original melodies. But you know, for jazz, when you have to improvise, and that's what really grabbed me with jazz, is that instant composition that you do when you improvise. What Lester Bowie used to call the risk factor. And when I found out, wow, you're supposed to come up with new ideas every time you play a song. And once you hit the solo, it's like, wow, you're like free for all kind of. And you really have to make sense and create an architecture on the fly, on the go, and tell a story with your playing. For me, that's really the element that really captured me, was taking those kind of chances in front of an audience every time and keeping it fresh and still challenging yourself constantly to open your mind, open your heart, open your soul, and share it with your audience.
Because technically, you know, Duke Ellington and even Wayne Shorter, or I mean, I can go on with some great jazz minds. They literally are classical composers. It's an American art form, and they are literally in the vein of classical music.
Well, exactly, and that's why I'm glad that finally the term American art form came through, because it really is an art form, and even though it's an oral art tradition, and it does get taught at universities now around the world. And I'm one of those teachers that goes around the world teaching. I just taught a big masterclass in Peru, for example, out of all places. But I do a lot of teaching. I've taught at Berklee College of Music, NYU, you name it, the National Conservatory. It's important to tell people what it's all about and how does it get taught and how do you still keep it fresh. And that's a challenge for any jazz musician. And then how do you find your original voice after you learn the tradition? Then it's, you have to come through your instrument and kind of separate yourself from the rest of the gang, you know, and be identifiable and have an identifiable sound. That's the challenge of any jazz musician. And I would refer everybody to a famous Coltrane interview that he did in Stockholm, where he talked about that and how he was dealing with his own soul and his own, hesitations about his own playing, and he was honing his skills and still searching for that voice. Of course he had it, but, you know, it's a never-ending process. But for me, it was very inspiring to hear a master like that talking about his own playing and his own, hesitations and doubts and self-doubts and how you deal with them is very inspiring.
That'll do it again for another edition of the Pace Report, reporting live here at the Blue Note here in New York City. I'd like to personally thank Michel Camilo for his time, as well as the staff and management here at the Blue Note. As always, please visit my website, www.thepacereport.com, for my weekly column as well as my past segments. Until next time, remember, if it's in the groove, it'll make you move. Until next time, peace.